Hello, and welcome back to the Resolution Room. In today's episode, we're pulling back the curtain on a mysterious force that shapes our workplaces every day: silent agreements. Now, before you check your calendar to see if you missed a meeting, let me assure you, you've definitely encountered these. Have you ever noticed how nobody at the office microwaves fish for lunch? Or how the person who empties the coffee pot always seems to brew the next batch? No one told you these things on day one, yet everyone just knows. These little unspoken customs are harmless. Well, except the fish one. Never microwave fish in a shared kitchen or eat it on an airplane. But beyond break room etiquette, entire organizations run on a hidden rulebook of behaviors and expectations that no one has formally written down. Think of it like the workplace's own fight club. The first rule of silent agreements is you don't talk about silent agreements. These are the unwritten rules. The this is just how we do things around here. Understandings that everyone absorbs over time. They determine who speaks up in meetings, how decisions really get made, and even who gets access to opportunities, often more than any official policy manual does. In fact, as one leadership coach pointed out, these unseen norms frequently shape your experience at work more than formal policies ever could. Today, we're going to shine a light on these shadowy agreements. We'll explore what silent agreements are, and no, it's not the name of a 90s boy band. I checked. How they emerge in team dynamics, and the impact they have on workplace culture. More importantly, we'll discuss how to identify and renegotiate these unspoken rules. Because sometimes a silent agreement that once kept the peace might now be holding your team back. Along the way, I'll share real life examples from the corporate world, nonprofit orgs, and government agencies to see how these dynamics play out in different arenas. And don't worry, this is a professional deep dive, but I'll sprinkle in a bit of humor to keep things lively. After all, one unwritten rule of this podcast is learning should be fun. So grab your coffee and remember to refill the pot, get comfy, and let's decode the secret rulebook of workplace culture. Ready? Let's dive in. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is a silent agreement? Simply put, silent agreements are the unspoken rules of relationships, and that includes workplace relationships and team interactions. They grow out of assumptions, expectations, and beliefs that people never explicitly voice. Yet somehow, everyone abides by them and even holds each other accountable to them. In other words, they're those deals you think you've made with others without actually saying a word. Spooky, right? It's like telepathy. Except instead of Professor X reading your mind, it's your boss expecting you to answer emails at 10 o'clock. Because that's just what hard workers do here. And that's PM. Silent agreements go by a lot of names. You might hear them referred to as unwritten rules, implicit norms, or hidden expectations. Organizational psychologists sometimes talk about the psychological contract, which is a fancy term for the unwritten deal between employees and employers. The stuff that's not in your job contract, but you feel is expected, like unwritten rules about loyalty, effort, or opportunities. Whether we call them silent agreements or unwritten rules, the idea is the same. These are the guidelines that everyone follows, but nobody spells out. Every workplace has them. Often, no one explicitly teaches you these rules, yet everyone eventually learns them. Think back to your first week on a new team. You were probably focused on the written rules, the HR employee handbook, the org chart, the formal training. But pretty soon, you started picking up on the real rules that aren't written anywhere, like whether it's actually okay to leave at 5 p.m. on the dot, or if doing so labels you as not a team player. Or you learn which topics are safe to discuss with your manager and which ones are practically taboo. These silent agreements, living in the shadows of the official rulebook, can cover everything from how candidly people speak to the boss. For example, an unspoken rule might be never contradict the CEO in a meeting, to who actually fixes the problems. We all quietly rely on owls to handle the messy issues, even though it's not in our job description. One classic example from relationship psychology that carries right over into the office is the he should know that already phenomenon. In a team context, it might be something like a manager thinking, I shouldn't have to tell my staff I appreciate their work. They should know if I'm not criticizing, it means they're doing fine. Meanwhile, the team silently expects, the boss hasn't praised us lately, which must mean we're failing. Both sides assume the other has agreed to an unspoken rule. No news is good news versus no news is bad news. And both end up frustrated. See how easily a silent agreement can form? Each side believes the other understands an expectation that was never actually discussed. Silent agreements often persist because people fear breaking them. They can continue indefinitely without discussion due to fear, guilt, feelings of obligation, or just plain conflict avoidance. It's as if everyone signed a secret pact to maintain the status quo. For instance, a team might have a silent agreement that meetings end only when the boss stands up, because no one has the nerve to be the first to leave. Or an employee might silently agree to take on extra work every weekend because they assume that's the expected norm. And they're afraid that speaking up or setting boundaries will label them as non dedicated. In many cases, people go along with these unspoken expectations out of fear of repercussions if they challenge them. It's important to note that silent agreements aren't always nefarious or bad. They can arise from positive intentions or practical needs. In fact, sometimes these hidden norms fill the gaps left by formal rules. Think of them as the informal etiquette that keeps things running smoothly, like the unwritten rule that the last person out of the conference room turns off the projector. Nobody issued a memo on that, but it helps, right? Silent agreements can provide a sense of order and identity in a group, a shared understanding of how we do things here that strengthens bonds and efficiency. One source calls unwritten rules a silent compass that helps people navigate the social landscape of work, giving a sense of unity and shared understanding. However, and this is a big however, not all silent agreements are created equal. Some are harmless or even helpful, but others can be outdated, dysfunctional, and outright toxic. As we dig deeper, keep this in mind. The goal isn't to get rid of every unwritten rule. Good luck with that. Humans will always develop informal norms. Instead, we want to become aware of them so we can keep the helpful ones and challenge the harmful ones. In the next segment, let's talk about how these silent agreements form in the first place. Spoiler alert, they don't appear by magic, and we are often complicit in creating them, whether we realize it or not. Silent agreements usually start out innocently, often as logical responses to a given situation. Over time, though, they can harden into that unspoken code of behavior everyone follows. So, how does an unwritten rule get born? Imagine you're in a new workplace. You observe how people behave, what earns approval, what seems to irritate the boss, who gets rewarded. Those observations teach you the ropes beyond the rulebook. Maybe you notice that staying late is just what everyone does, or that asking too many questions in meetings makes folks frown. At first, these behaviors arise as coping strategies, ways to succeed, or at least not rock the boat in that specific environment. If speaking up got someone reprimanded in the past, people learn to stay quiet next time. If going above and beyond got someone a bonus, others learn to quietly compete to outwork each other. According to organizational experts, unwritten rules often develop as responses to real pressures and incentives. One article in the Systems Thinker explains that such rules begin as sensible strategies to survive or excel in a corporate climate. But over time, these strategies become an unspoken code, imitated by others. Nobody officially decrees these rules. No one really seems to be in control of them, and they can be hard to articulate because they've just become part of the culture. In plain terms, people follow by example. If the senior folks always do things a certain way, newcomers quickly get the hint. That's the way to fit in here. Fear and uncertainty can turbocharge the creation of silent agreements. Consider a company going through layoffs. Always a stressful time. Management doesn't explicitly say, don't ask for help, or always look busy, but employees might start behaving that way out of fear of losing their jobs. Suddenly, there's an unwritten rule that you must appear 110% competent and independent at all times. I must look good or I'll end up on the layoff list, people think. So they stop admitting mistakes or requesting assistance, fearing it will make them look expendable. This coping behavior spreads and solidifies into a norm. Everyone pretends they have no problems. Ironically, that undermines teamwork and learning, making things worse for the organization. It's a silent agreement born from panic. Thou shalt not show vulnerability. Silent agreements also reflect the personal histories and cultural backgrounds of team members. Each of us carries certain beliefs about how things should work based on our upbringing, past jobs, or cultural values. When we enter a group, we might unconsciously project those expectations. For instance, if you grew up in a culture or family where respect for authority was paramount, you might assume it's unacceptable to question your boss, even if in this new workplace, healthy debate is encouraged. Meanwhile, someone from a different background might assume everything is up for discussion. Without realizing it, each person might operate by their own silent rulebook until conflict or confusion forces a reckoning. Management professor Amy Edmondson gives a great example. Many team members carry unspoken rules like don't criticize something the boss helped create, or don't speak up unless you have hard data, based on what they learned in past environments. Unless leaders explicitly reset those expectations, people will default to the silent agreements they've internalized from prior experience. Let's not forget hierarchy and power dynamics. Often, silent agreements from people infer rules from how leaders behave. If a manager always skips lunch, a silent norm might emerge that taking a lunch break is for slackers. If the CEO never openly disagrees with their own boss, say the board, everyone down the chain might assume challenging higher ups is verbatim. In many workplaces, there's a silent agreement that bad news is watered down when reporting upward. Nobody formally says only tell the boss the good stuff. But if messengers get shot, figuratively, of course, a few times, everyone learns to toe the line. The result? A culture of yes men and yes women, all because of a tacit pact not to upset the boss with honesty. As one coach noted, these hidden norms often reflect the undercurrent dynamics, the trust networks, informal alliances, and emotions that drive behavior. Translation? People quickly learn who holds influence or who is friends with whom, and silent agreements form around those social currents. Repetition and success also reinforces silent agreements. The more employees see a behavior working or going unpunished, the more it gets ingrained. If everyone complies with an unwritten rule and things appear to run smoothly, it gains legitimacy. That's just how things are done. Humans are great at normalizing even odd practices if they seem to avert pain or bring gain. A famous and unfortunate example of normalization is normalization of deviance, a term from NASA's space shuttle program. Engineers fell into an unwritten practice of accepting small technical anomalies as normal because nothing bad happened immediately. Over time, the silent acceptance led to tragedy, as with the Challenger disaster. In that case, the silent agreement was we don't halt a launch over these known issues because previously it always turned out fine until it didn't. While that's an extreme scenario, it shows how a group can gradually shift into a dangerous unspoken pact. Ignore the warning signs without anyone formally endorsing it. It started as maybe it's okay this one time and became this is how we do it every time. Lastly, silent agreements are more likely to sprout and persist in environments where communication is poor or psychological safety is low. If people don't feel safe openly discussing issues or asking, why do we do this? They will continue to assume and infer. For example, if new hires are too afraid to ask about the rationale behind a process, they'll just do as others do, potentially perpetuating an inefficient or silly unwritten rule forever. In contrast, teams that talk about the norms and expectations are more likely to catch and correct dysfunctional silent agreements early. We'll talk more about that when we get into solutions, how leaders and teams can surface these underground rules. To sum up this section, unspoken rules develop through observation, imitation, and a dash of fear or convenience. They often start as reasonable responses to a context, keeping your head down during a crisis, following the leader's example, respecting cultural habits, but then they ossify. Everyone adds another brick to the invisible wall of how we operate until one day it's just there. Next, we'll examine what all this means for your workplace. Are silent agreements keeping your culture, hurting it, or a bit of both? Silent agreements can be a double-edged sword when it comes to workplace culture. On one side, they can create unity and efficiency. On the other, they can breed dysfunction and exclusion. Let's explore both sides of that coin, the good, the bad, and the awkward, to see how these unspoken rules affect teams and organizations. The positive impacts. Believe it or not, some unwritten rules help hold an organization together. They fill in the cracks of formal policies by providing a shared understanding of norms. A set of consistent, silent agreements can give a team its unique identity, its culture. For example, a company might have an unwritten rule of informal mentorship. where senior staff naturally offer guidance to juniors even though it's not mandated. Or there might be a positive silent agreement that brainstorm sessions are a judgment free zone, encouraging wild ideas without fear of ridicule. Maybe nobody said it in writing, but everyone just knows that any idea is welcome. These kind of silent norms can enhance collaboration, trust, and performance. Research suggests that unwritten rules often provide a sense of unity and shared identity among employees, which improves teamwork and cohesion. They can act as a social glue, a bit like inside jokes or folk ways that bond a community. For instance, a team might have a little tradition, i.e., the first person in each morning turns on the lights and the coffee machine, that isn't in any handbook, but keeps things running smoothly and shows mutual consideration. When aligned with the organization's goals, such silent agreements support productivity and a positive climate. Additionally, silent agreements sometimes uphold core values in ways rules can't. Think of healthcare workers with the unwritten rule: patients come first, paperwork later. No policy may say that explicitly. Policies might even demand paperwork ASAP. But the culture's silent pact to prioritize patient care is a positive norm that guides split second decisions. In startups, you often find a silent ethos like we challenge ideas, not people, which, if widely adopted, can fuel innovation, even without a formal document saying be innovative. In short, when unwritten rules are healthy and in sync with organizational values, they make the culture stronger. They can encourage beneficial behavior spontaneously. People do the right thing even when no one is watching or requiring it, because it's understood norm, not a negative impacts, because there's always a dark side. Silent agreements, if misaligned or left unchecked, can become the bane of workplace culture. One big issue is that they can perpetuate outdated or harmful practices simply because that's how it's always been. They might quietly resist change. For example, if there's an unwritten rule that speaking up about problems will get you labeled a troublemaker, employees will stay silent about issues, leading to mistakes, misconduct, or inefficiencies going unreported. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's a silent agreement in many organizations. Bad news travels slowly upward. Over time, these hidden norms can create a culture of fear or complacency. As Wafa Basili noted, when left unchecked, hidden norms often cause dysfunction. They might be holding a complex system together in the short term, but in unhealthy ways, like a band aid covering a deep wound. Silent agreements can also override official policies and practice, which can be dangerous. Company handbook says one thing, but the culture's unwritten code says another. For instance, a company might officially promote work life balance, but the silent agreement is that anyone who leaves before their boss is gone will be subtly penalized. The old last to leave competition. Thus, the role culture is one of overwork and burnout, despite HR's wellness memos. Or consider diversity and inclusion. A company might have formal policies against discrimination, but the true culture might include an unwritten rule like the guys golf with the boss, and that's how promotions happen, effectively sidelining those not part of that in group. Silent agreements like that can reinforce bias and inequality without a single word ever being spoken. In fact, one could argue that the glass ceiling in some organizations is upheld partly by unwritten norms of who is seen as leadership material and who isn't. A particularly toxic example of a silent agreement is the infamous blue wall of silence in some police departments. This is the unspoken rule that officers should not report a fellow officer's misconduct or mistakes. It's not written in any code of conduct. Quite the opposite. Official rules demand honesty. But culturally, many cops have understood that whistleblowing equals betrayal. This kind of silent agreement severely undermines accountability and trust, with dire consequences for organizational integrity and public safety. When Derek Chauvin was on trial for George Floyd's death, many were shocked, in a good way, to see police officers breaking the code of silence and testifying against him. A sign that maybe that unwritten rule was finally cracking. The blue wall example illustrates how destructive a silent agreement can be. It vexed the pursuit of safe, effective policing for decades, until courageous leadership and cultural shifts started to challenge it. Even in less life and death settings, silent agreements can quietly wreak havoc. They can create resentment and frustration when people have different understandings of the deal. An employee might feel betrayed if they believed in an unspoken promise. Say the understanding that if I sacrifice weekends now, I'll be rewarded later, that never materialized. These breaches of the psychological contract lead to feelings of betrayal rather than mere disappointment. Think of the diligent worker who never takes a vacation because of an implied understanding that doing so shows commitment, only to get passed over for promotion in favor of someone who did take vacations. Ouch. There was a mismatch in silent expectations, and now you have a disengaged, embittered employee. Misaligned silent agreements often manifest in conflicts or sudden blowups. I thought you knew I needed help on that project. Why didn't you offer? Well, I thought we had an understanding that if you needed help, you'd ask. Both sides upheld what they thought was the rule, and both ended up disappointed. Furthermore, hidden norms can make a workplace confusing and unwelcoming, especially for newcomers or outsiders. Have you ever joined a team where it felt like there was an invisible hazing process? You accidentally break a rule you never knew existed, and people react like you tracked mud on the carpet? Not fun. This is a common experience for people from different cultural or demographic backgrounds entering into an established group. Each organization, and even the teams within it, have a unique set of unwritten cultural rules. If you're not aware of them, you might inadvertently step on landmines. For instance, in one international company, a newly hired PhD from abroad was devastated by her supervisor's heavy written feedback on her report. She interpreted the sea of red pen as a sign she was failing. In her home culture, that much criticism would be a very bad sign. In reality, the supervisor was impressed and engaged, and thus gave very detailed feedback as a form of support. Here, both had different assumptions about the unwritten rules of feedback. One expected explicit praise if things are good. The other followed a norm of no news is good news. Critique means I care. The result was a near conflict born purely of silent cultural expectations. Only after they actually talked did they understand each other, averting a potential resignation born of misunderstanding. The moral? Unspoken rules differ across cultures. And if a team isn't proactively bridging those gaps, the silent agreements can cause friction or drive away talent who feel they don't fit. To recap, silent agreements can define the real culture, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. They can unify teams with shared habits and values, but they can also silently enforce bad habits, stifle communication, and undermine stated goals. The real culture of an organization is often revealed not by the mission statement on the wall, but by the unwritten and unspoken agreements people actually live by. That's why recognizing them is key. If you don't see them, you can't change the ones that need changing. Speaking of which, it's time we move from diagnosis to action. How do you identify these stealthy rules, and what can you do to renegotiate or change the ones that aren't serving your team? In the next episode, we'll dive into strategies for bringing silent agreements into the open and resetting the terms, especially how to talk about Fight Club. Sorry, Tyler. Thank you again for joining the Resolution Room. I look forward to you checking in on the next episode. And if you haven't already, check out my latest book, Human Resources for the Soul: How to Manage the Human in You, on sale now on Amazon. See you later.